Turning now to COVID. A damning new joint report from the Health and Social Care and Science and Technology Committees has slammed the UK's early pandemic response. Whilst the vaccine rollout was acknowledged as among the best in the world, our first months of the pandemic handling were among the worst. We ignored warnings from elsewhere, particularly East Asia, and submitted to deadly scientific groupthink. This is a story of a failure to challenge scientists, a failure of too rigidly, too blindly following the science, whatever that means. A failure to challenge early scientific assumptions, to lift our eyes to more distant horizons and to learn from East Asia. Japan never had to have a national lockdown. Why? It understood that an airborne disease is dealt with better through ventilation, masks and avoiding crowds, not by wiping down surfaces, as bizarrely we're obsessed with in the UK. Closing borders clearly limits viral spread, yet our scientists initially advised against that. Preventing large gatherings clearly slows spread too, yet our scientists initially advised to keep them. And of course, if you're to lock down at all, the sooner you do it, the shorter it needs to be to squash out the virus. Pull the trigger earlier and there's less infection to get rid of. You can get back to normality sooner. Yet our scientists urged delay. Delay that led to a longer lockdown, more social, health and economic harms, more than we needed to endure. And at the start, the only politician who genuinely challenged the scientific groupthink in the UK was an independent. It was Rory Stewart. In every nation of the UK, politicians of all parties, in England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, failed, particularly on care homes. And yet now, remarkably, the Labour Party is trying to make political capital out of it all. This morning, Keir Starmer shared a message calling the committee's findings a damning report into monumental errors made by ministers in responding to the pandemic. But what was the Labour Party saying at the time, back in March 2020? Well, the chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, appeared on a BBC radio programme on the 8th of March 2020. She was disagreeing with Rory Stewart's calls for restrictions. He was on the same programme. And instead, she backed the government's strategy. I've got some of her words here. She said that I've been very impressed with the work of the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Scientific Advisor. The problem is, if you move immediately, for example, into measures like stopping large-scale events, that can have unintended consequences. The words of Annalise Dodds. In other words, she was following the scientists, opposing stopping large-scale events on the 8th of March 2020. Indeed, Dodds went on to explicitly defend the government's lethargic action plan in the same interview.
I don't think this is a reflection of passivity, just to make that clear. I mean, the action plan that the government has set out, I mean, OK, a government have a different political persuasion to mine, but they have stated, at some point we will need to shift from the potentially containment stage to the delay stage. And they have set out
that'll be Tuesday or Wednesday.
But they set out the risks from potentially doing that too early.
It's clear that politicians of all parties, with the exception of perhaps Rory Stewart, got this wrong. The Labour Party and the SNP just as much as the Tories. The lesson to draw from this is precisely the opposite lesson than that to which far too many people have been parroting throughout this crisis. The lesson of our early response to this crisis is not follow the scientists, not blindly listen to what they say. It's talk to the scientists, challenge the scientists, work with the scientists. And if you're ever in a room where absolutely everyone agrees, no question asked, you're doing something very wrong.